In a world where words sometimes fail, there's one language that never does: touch. But what happens when that bond fades? Can simple gestures rebuild what's been lost? Stay with us, and see how a small touch can transform everything.
In a small town nestled between rolling hills and blooming meadows, there lived a couple, Ella and James, who had been married for 10 years. Their love had started as a spark, growing into a steady flame that lit their lives. But like any long-term relationship, the days had passed with a mix of joy and challenges. Despite the deep affection they shared, something had begun to shift. Ella, a thoughtful and introspective woman, had always prided herself on being independent. She had her career, her passions, and her quiet moments alone. James, on the other hand, was warm and affectionate, always trying to connect through little gestures of love, holding hands, whispering "I love you," and even the gentle touch on her shoulder as he passed by. But recently, as the years went by, Ella had found herself caught up in work and the routine of daily life. Their conversations had become fewer, their touches more absent. One evening, after a long day at work, Ella returned home to find James sitting at the kitchen table, his fingers lightly tapping the wood. He looked up with a smile, but something in his eyes seemed distant. He was waiting for her to notice, waiting for her to see beyond the routine of their day-to-day lives. "How was your day?" James asked, though his voice carried a note of hesitation, almost as if he feared the answer. "It was fine," Ella replied, removing her coat and setting her briefcase down. She walked into the kitchen, absent-mindedly starting to prepare dinner. James watched her silently, but his gaze never left her. She felt it, but she didn't know how to respond. There had been a time when they would share everything, laugh over meals, and discuss their dreams. But now, there was a space between them, filled with unspoken words and unmet needs. Ella continued chopping vegetables, her mind far away from the room, from him. Finally, James stood up and slowly walked over to her. His hand, large and warm, gently rested on her wrist. She froze. The contact was soft, almost tentative, but it sent a ripple of awareness through her. "Ella," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "we've stopped touching." Ella looked up at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to say something, something profound, something to explain the distance she felt. But words felt inadequate. Instead, she met his gaze, and in that quiet moment, she understood. Over the years, they had built their lives together, but in doing so, they had slowly forgotten the power of touch. The gentle hand on the back when one was upset, the simple kiss before bed, the embrace after a long day. These were the moments that had once carried them through the toughest times. These were the small acts that created trust, that built the silent connection between them. James, seeing the confusion and sorrow in her eyes, gently pulled her into his arms. His embrace was firm but loving, like a silent promise that he was there. Ella hesitated for a moment, but then, with a quiet sigh, she wrapped her arms around him. The weight of the years, of the unspoken tension, began to melt away in that simple touch. "I've missed you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. James held her a little tighter. "I've missed you too. I don't want us to lose this, Ella. We don't need to talk all the time, but we need to feel each other. We need to trust that, even when everything else feels uncertain, we are here for each other. In touch, in silence, in all the small ways." Ella nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek, though she smiled through it. She realized that it wasn't the grand gestures that mattered, it was the quiet moments of connection, the trust they built with every touch, every glance, every shared breath. From that day on, Ella and James made a conscious effort to reconnect, not just through words, but through the small, meaningful gestures that had once made their bond unbreakable. They learned that trust wasn't just built on promises or grand acts, it was woven into the fabric of everyday life, in the simple act of holding hands, in the warmth of an embrace, and in the quiet moments shared together. The years continued to pass, but their bond grew even stronger, not because they always had the perfect words, but because they understood the power of touch, the silent trust that spoke louder than anything else. And in those quiet moments, Ella and James discovered that the most meaningful connections weren't always the loudest. Sometimes, they were the softest, most gentle of gestures, the ones that said, "I'm here," even when words were unspoken.